Rambam. We are learning the laws of shchita, of slaughtering. We're learning now. It's very detailed. My gosh. We're in chapter 9. What is meant by the word pisuka, which literally it's one of the 8 categories of what's called a treif, an unhealthy animal that would not survive. And it means severed. So if the skin that covers the marrow of the spinal cord is severed, the animal's treif. It's not kosher because it means it's not a healthy animal. Right? In other words, you slaughtered it properly. Right? Kosher animal, it's a cow, and you slaughtered it properly, but the skin that covers the marrow is severed of the spinal cord, so it's treif. This applies provided the majority of the circumference of the skin is severed. If, however, the skin is split lengthwise or perforated, the animal is permitted. We really need, the biology here of the animal and the pictures over here. Well, you could get diagrams; it won't be so gross, right? Or go into a slaughterhouse and to be able to actually see this. Yeah, it would be similar to the backbone. If the backbone was broken, but the spinal cord was not split, or the marrow within the cord was crushed, it would wobble. The animal is permitted because the skin is still intact. Okay, that sounds okay. If the marrow decomposes and it could be poured like water or molten wax to the extent that the spinal cord cannot stand and be lifted, the animal's trait. The reason it cannot stand is because of its weight. The animal's status is doubtful. Aha, and if it's not because of the spinal cord, in other words, it's because of the weight of the animal. You got to know your animals. To where does the spinal cord extend? It begins behind the two glands at the beginning of the neck and extends until the second divider. Thus, nothing remains after it except the third divider, which is close to the beginning of the tail. Okay. There are 3 dividers. There are 3 bones that cleave to each other below the vertebrae of the backbone, and the spinal cord of the fowl extends to it in between the wings. Below these places, we are not concerned with the cord that extends there, even if the skin is severed or its marrow decays. All right.
Who would bring such animals for sacrifice?
What do you mean? No, this is for kosher to have an animal, right? The spinal cord is okay. There are 3 dividers, 3 bones that cleave to each other below the vertebrae. The backbone. Spinal cord of the fowl extends it to in between the wings. Below these places, we are not concerned with the cord that extends there, even if the skin was severed or its marrow decays. Okay. What is meant by the term kerua, ripped? This concerns the flesh that covers the majority of the animal's belly. If it is ripped open, the belly will fall out. If this flesh is ripped open, the animal is treif. This applies, right? Remember, as they say, there's no animal that dies a pleasant death. It doesn't die of old age. It just went to sleep and didn't wake up, right? It got ripped by another animal. But what happens? It got ripped by an animal and it didn't die, right? It wasn't killed. Well, then it depends what that rip is, right? It depends where the rip is and what the rip is, if it will be considered treif. So here we're talking about the belly, that the flesh was ripped open, the animal is treif. This applies even when the tear did not reach the belly itself to the extent that it is seen. Instead, since the majority of the thickness of the flesh was ripped open or removed, the animal is treif. What is the measure of the tear? It must be a hand's breadth long. Second, okay, yeah. Right, this is a hand's breadth, right? 3 inches or so. If the animal was small and the majority of the length of the flesh covering the belly was torn, it is treif, even though the tear is not a hand's breadth long, for the majority of the length was torn. Okay, so it can even be less than a hand breadth. Following rules apply if a circular or oblong portion of the flesh was cut. If it was larger than a sella, which is like a dime, large enough to fit tightly 3 date seeds next to each other, the animal's trait. But when
All from Torah, from the oral tradition.
this is the oral tradition, yes, this is not. When this size cut will be extended, it will be a hand breadth in length. When the skin of the animal was removed from it entirely, whether it was torn off or the hand or decomposed by sickness of the animal's trait, this is called geluda. If a portion of the skin was wide as a sella remained on the backbone, or one wide as a sella remained on the navel, and one wide in the sella remained on the tips of the limbs, the animal is permitted because it could be regenerated. I don't know how that happens exactly. If the portion of the wide as the cell was removed from the entire backbone, from the navel or from the tips of the limbs, but the remainder of the skin remained intact, there's a doubt concerning the ruling. It appears to me that we permit the animal. Okay. What is meant by the term nefula? Means falling. When an animal fell from a high place, at least 10 handbreadths high, you know, some, 35 inches or something like that, and one of the organs was crushed, it is treif. To what extent must it be crushed? It must be smashed and become ailing because of the fall to the extent that its form and appearance has been destroyed. Even though the organ is not perforated, cracked, or broken, the animal is treif. Similarly, if one struck it with a stone or with a staff and crushed one of its organs, it is treif. To which organs are we referring? To those in the body's inner cavity. So any of the organs inside, if there was a fall, it was a hit, something like that, then it becomes treif. If the animal walks from after the falling from the roof, we do not suspect it became treif. If it stood but did not walk, we harbor such suspicions. If it jumped from the roof on its own initiative, we do not harbor suspicions. Huh?
On the roof.
Because it prepared itself for the jump, that it wouldn't cause injury. Right?
Roof is interesting.
If a person left his animal on the roof and found it on the ground, we do not suspect that it fell. Right? And therefore, be concerned. We assume that it jumped intentionally, in other words. It jumped intentionally. That's, well, if we didn't see what happened, right?
Find out.
Yeah, you ask your cow. Yeah. My mother the car, my mother the cow. No, don't say that about your mother. That won't go over well. When bulls butt each other, we do not harbor suspicions. If one falls to the ground, we harbor suspicions. Similarly, if we see an animal dragging its feet, we do not suspect that the organs were crushed or that its backbone were severed. When thieves steal lambs and throw them outside the corral, we do not suspect that their organs were crushed because when they throw them, because they throw them only with the intent that it will not be broken, because they're throwing them in order to, they don't want them to, they're stealing them, right? If they returned them and threw them back in the corral, because of fear, we suspect that they may become treif. Because then they don't care. When they're stealing it, they care because they're stealing it in order to get money for it, right? Well, if it's not going to be healthy animal, you're going to see that, and someone's not going to want to buy it. So they're careful. But if they're returning it because of fear, I guess, of being caught. Yeah, being caught. So then they are not careful. If they return them out of a desire to repent, we do not harbor suspicion of lambs because the thieves have intent of returning the intact, and therefore they will be careful when throwing them back. They did tshuva. What good thieves. Yeah. Give me a moment. When an ox was forced to lie down for slaughter, we do not suspect that the internal organs were crushed. This applies to it fell considerably to the extent that it made a great noise when it fell. The rationale is that it implants its hooves into it and strengthens itself until it falls to the ground. If one struck an animal on its head and the blow extended towards an animal on its head and the blow extended toward its tail, or one hit it on its tail and the blow extended toward its head, even if one struck it on the entire backbone, we do not suspect it became trait. If the staff had bulges at different points, we harbor suspicion concerning the animal. If the head of the staff reached the portion of the backbone, we harbor suspicion. Similarly, we harbor suspicion if he struck the animal across the breadth of the backbone. When a fowl is knocked against a firm article, meaning a heap of grain, a mound of almonds, and the like, suspect the organs have been crushed. If, by contrast, it was knocked against something soft, folded garment straw, garment straw, ashes, and the like, we not harbor suspicions. The following rules apply: when the fowl's wings became stuck with glue, when it was being captured, and it received a blow, if only one wing became stuck, we do not suspect to become trait. If both wings became stuck, we received the blow, and it received a blow on its body, we harbor suspicion. Following rules apply: if it knocked against water, if it swam for its full height up river against the current, we do not suspect it became trait because obviously it's strong. If, however, it swims downriver with the current, we harbor suspicion for perhaps the water is carrying it, and it does, and it's and it got crushed. If it advances towards straw or hay that is floating on the river, it is swimming on its own power. We do not harbor suspicion. In all of the situations where we said we do not harbor suspicions, it is permitted to slaughter the animal immediately, and it is not necessary to check whether an organ was crushed. In all situations where we said we harbor suspicions, if one slaughters the animal, one must check its entire internal category from the head to the hind thigh. If any of the factors that render an animal treif mentioned above were discovered, or one of the inner organs was crushed to the extent that its form was destroyed, the animal is treif. Even if one of the organs whose removal does not render the animal treif, I mean the spleen or the kidneys, it's crushed, the animal is treif. There's an exception. The uterus, if it is crushed, the animal is permitted. Fascinating. Wow. What you got to know about animals? Huh? The gullet and the windpipe do not require examination in these situations if the fall will not crush them. When an animal fell from ruin and didn't sun afterwards, it's forbidden to slaughter it until one waits an entire day. If one slaughtered it during that time, it is straight. When one slaughters it after a day has passed, the examination is required, as we've explained, right? You got to examine the inner organs of the animal. Similarly, if a person treaded on a fowl with his feet, an animal trampled on it, or it was crushed against a wall, or it is in death's throes, we leave it alive for a day. Afterwards, we slaughter it and examine it as stated. Last halacha for chapter 9, when the majority of the windpipe and the gullet were separated and hang loosely, the animal is treif. This applies even if the condition occurs. So once the majority of windpipe and the gullet were separated and hang loosely, the animal is treif. This applies even if the condition occurs due to the reasons other than a fall. Similarly, if it became folded over, the animal is unacceptable because it is no longer fit for ritual slaughter. Not because of the health of it, because it's impossible to slaughter it because of the folded over, and I don't know. If by contrast, even though the majority or of the throat, that the throat was set loose from the jawbone, the animal's permitted for. The throat area is not fit for ritual slaughter, as we've explained. Not exactly clear on that one. All right.
People enjoy that too much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
We have to go to an animal farm, not to what's his name's animal farm though. No, what's the author's name?
Sure.
George Orwell, right? And not to that animal farm. Oh yes, today's learning. Oh my gosh, remind me his name again. Liba, Bida,
Bitzalel.
Tzalo. Yes, Tzal ben Yeshayahu. Neshama is definitely going from strength to strength. He's got two amazing sisters who make sure he should not be forgotten. God bless you all. Thank you.